you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high.
Everybody, I'm Eugene Driscoll. Welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast. I work for the Valley Independent Sentinel. It's valleyindy.org, covering Connecticut's lower Naugatuck Valley. So, all right, let's just get right to it, because these are busy people. They have lives. They have things to do. They don't have time to sit here and converse with me for too long. But Untold, Crimes and Penalties was released to Netflix about a week ago. Untold is a new sports docuseries, sort of Netflix answer to ESPN's popular 30 by 30 documentary series. And as I'm reading this, I forgot, I just got reading glasses, so I should probably put them on. Each episode, focuses on a single issue, and Crimes and Penalties tells the inside story of the Danbury Trashers, a minor league hockey team launched by Danbury trash hauler Jimmy Galante of New Fairfield, by the way, before it imploded in federal indictments, mob connections, and deeply unfair business practices. Galante made his 17-year-old son AJ the team's president, by the way, and here are 30 seconds from the preview for this documentary. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, turn this off right now, go watch it, and then come back. But here's the preview, 30 seconds.
A gentleman by the name of Jimmy Galante bought his 17-year-old son his own hockey team.
I'm the president of the Danbury Trashers, and I'm 17 years old.
This was the largest investigation I've ever been a part of.
Jimmy was the real Tony Soprano.
We were the bad boys of hockey, a freak mix of pro wrestling and the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, that's probably the best line of the documentary, where AJ describes what the Trashers were, and I'd say it's accurate, the combination of the Mighty Ducks and WWE. One thing I'll say right off the bat, I'm just going to throw my own opinion out there, and that this podcast is fact and some opinion. I don't think there's any record anywhere of David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, or anybody involved with The Sopranos, or anybody who wrote for The Sopranos, including like Richard Price and all these famous writers, that ties Jimmy Galante to the character of Tony Soprano. It's the only thing I'll say right off the bat. And if you have access to Google and you have fingers and ears, you could look that up yourself. But
no, I remember thinking the same thing when I was watching the documentary, because I remember also watching The Sopranos, and I think that's why a lot of people are intrigued by this case. And I remember it may have been based on another family.
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely. I have recordings, and I can even share all that later. But that was Karen Ali, by the way. Let me go around and introduce everybody, because I'm very nervous, and I'm very proud to have each member of the panel here tonight. What I've gathered is a bunch of people who were reporters and journalists and editors working for the News-Times of Danbury, Connecticut, where the Trashers were based, the newspaper that provided extensive coverage of Jimmy Galante before, during, and after the whole Danbury Trashers thing. I also have a former mayor to introduce in a second. These journalists will be responding to the doc and sharing memories, if they have any, of different aspects of the Galante case. So let's go around in alphabetical order. First, we have, you just heard her speak. She is the News-Times former court reporter. She was an editor with the paper. She won a public occurrence award at the News-Times. Was that at the News-Times, Karen? You won that?
Yeah. That was fun.
What was that for?
Yeah, that was for Galante.
Oh, it was for this. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, the whole team won it. But
okay.
I was like the lead reporter.
Welcome to the show, Karen Ali. My next guest.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I'll go in alphabetical order. The next guest was the longest serving mayor of Danbury, Connecticut. He stepped down in December 2020 to serve as Connecticut's commissioner of the Department of Revenue Services, which doesn't sound quite as exciting. But welcome to the program, former mayor of Danbury, Mark Boughton, everybody.
Thanks, Eugene. I hope I don't risk my job by being on here tonight, but I couldn't resist. And those were certainly exciting times. I do miss everybody on the screen, because even if you're being covered, by a reporter or an editor, I always understood what the border was, what the barrier was, but you do develop friendships and affinity for each other. And as I always say to young politicians that approach me about what we do, I said, don't worry, there'll be another story tomorrow. So be nice, be kind, and be transparent. And you'll always get treated fairly. You may not like what they write, but you'll be treated fairly. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mayor Boughton. Next is another former ink-stained wretch. During his years at the News-Times, he covered UConn basketball. He was an award-winning columnist. He was a sports columnist. He was sort of a slice-of-life columnist at one point. In addition to being a reporter and an editor in his own right, the man did it all. Please welcome Mr. Brian Koonz.
Thank you, Gene. Pleasure to be here with such a distinguished panel, and I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Me too. And Brian's got to go early, so we got to do this quickly. Next guest is actually a Seymour resident, so I do have one local connection to the Lower Naugatuck Valley, the area I cover for the valleyindy.org. He was the hard-charging managing editor of the News-Times when the FBI first raided Jimmy Galante's AWD trash business on White Street in Danbury. Ladies and gentlemen, my former boss, the greatest editor I ever worked with, Mr. Paul Sussman.
I'm blushing. Thank you. It's great to see all my former colleagues and former acquaintance and good acquaintance in Mark Boughton again.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get started. So I worked at the News-Times from 2003 to roughly 2009. I did 2 tours at the News-Times at Danbury. And at one point, I spent like an hour with Jimmy Galante. I don't remember even what the story was. I don't think I even got a story out of it. I just remember he couldn't stop talking about Mary Connolly, our editorial writer, and he had sent her flowers. He was just obsessed with Mary Connolly. But that's neither here nor there. Let's start with Brian Koonz, because he has to go to work, literally, as I said earlier. Brian, now maybe I imagined this, because my memory's not so good, but I sort of remember when all this was going on at some point, AJ Galante, the son, would only go through you. I remember one time being in the newsroom, we were working on some story, and the only person in the newsroom he would talk to was you. I even remember I think he called on the overhead phone. We were on deadline for some story about Galante. I don't know where it was in the timeline, but a hush came over the newsroom because he wanted to talk to you and you alone. So everyone just sat there and listened as you were talking to this kid. Did I make that up? Maybe I was drinking. What was going on?
No, and I think it really played out the way that Mark was talking about a little bit before, that he was the president of the Trashers, as perhaps as absurd as it might be, 17 years old. But I spoke with him as if he were the president, which he was, and that I think that I treated him fairly. I think that he thought that I treated him fairly. I think that his dad thought that I treated him fairly. And like Mark said, that he may not have liked everything that I wrote, but I would get, his side of the story, or if I had a question or I needed a detail, would reach out to him and give him a fair shake. But I think that's...
Was it a thing, Brian? Was it a thing where he would... am I wrong, though? Because I remember him specifically asking, like, you were the only person he would talk to at one point. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
No, that is correct. I think that he felt, and, I'm not sure where that originated from, perhaps from his dad and such too, that didn't trust anyone in the media. And from going from the early days to his initial press conference, I didn't cover them as a beat. Rich Gregory, that folks here may remember, covered the Trashers as a beat. As you mentioned earlier, I was covering UConn at that time, but I would come in and do some spot duty. Actually, the second year when they ended up playing the team from Kalamazoo for the championship, went out to Kalamazoo and had a chance to just sit and not necessarily for a story, but shoot the breeze with AJ a little bit, and what's going on, how are things going. So I think there was a rapport there that I wasn't out to necessarily bury them, but I wasn't out to either, glorify the Trashers or the AJ or the Galante family either. My objective was to get the story. And he, in fact, he was my best source.
He was just a kid, though. I mean, you look back, there's that scene in the documentary.
Oh, sure.
Where he introduced, he's at a press conference and the kid's 17 years old and he acts like a 17-year-old kid, and it was kind of thrust into the spotlight. And I guess one of the things I'll say nice about the documentary is that I like it's sort of AJ's story. Jimmy Galante is still an enigma, I think, to a lot of us, and you don't really have any idea of who he is as a man by the end of this. But so what was AJ like? Did he seem like he was in over his head? Because the documentary makes it seem like, actually, he's the guy that put the team together in terms of positives for the Trashers. He's the kid that did it. Was he scared? Was he nervous? What was he like to talk to?
I think he was initially. I do. I think that he was nervous and scared. But I think on the, the other side of that coin, I think that he was energized and excited. Like you heard him there, that holy cow, we're going to have a cross between, professional wrestling and the Mighty Ducks. And as you see from game one, puck drops and the gloves drop, and let's go. I mean, there was no illusions here about what this team was going to be. It was going to be a fight first, play hockey second type of team. That said, I think that was the whole marketing shtick. Fans from Greater Danbury responded to that, and I think as more fans filled the arena, as all of a sudden now, it wasn't just the News-Times and WLAD. You had media from Hartford coming, media from ESPN coming, media from New York coming. I think that you could see him growing into this role, becoming more confident. But again, I think that, and it's always the way I've tried to conduct myself, covering UConn with Jim Calhoun.
Not like me.
No, with Jim Calhoun, the same. And Jim Calhoun hated my guts. As Mark had mentioned, Mark had always been a straight shooter with me. I'm sure there were times when I was a take on life columnist. He didn't necessarily like some of the things that I wrote, but you try to maintain that professional, relationship with people, and don't burn bridges. It's not always, you're not always going to be liked, but your job is to report the story, as best and as fairly and as accurately as you can.
All right, since you got to go, what was your impression of this documentary? And I'm also going to ask you how many hockey sticks would you give it out of 5? I just made that up. I don't know. What'd you think?
So, what I thought was really interesting here was, I think that you would use the word ambiguity early on. That this documentary makes it very clear that certainly the fighting, the bad boys of hockey, that whole image, yes, that put fans in the seats, Section 102, the whole 9 yards. But it's not that the fighting isn't the reason that they won. The reason that they won is because they frankly they cheated, right? You look at doing the jobs, and they mentioned not just the no-show AWD, DWD, all these the alphabet soup trash companies being able to do these no-show jobs, not just for players. And you had former Trashers confirming that in the documentary, their wives as well. You looked at, I remember with the indictment, I went back and did a little bit of research on stories that I wrote and Karen wrote and other folks wrote, that the salary cap for the United Hockey League at that time was $250,000, and the feds estimated that the Trashers were somewhere like 3 times that, somewhere around $750,000.
And they still didn't win a championship.
And they still didn't win a championship. But the point is that you talked about AJ, that Jim Galante was ready to open the purse strings, write the checks, bring them in. But if we're going to go and we're going to pay you 3 times than what you would get from some other team, we're going to give you some no-show jobs and some of those other things. Yeah, you know what? Okay, I don't care about scoring goals or assists or being a great defender or a great goal, whatever you want me to do, Mr. Galante. And that's really what it came down to. And I think that you see that, and that's really, it's why they won, why they were able to command, I think, the attention and this whole mystique that they had. It wasn't because they were necessarily the best hockey players. They were some of the best fighters, and that, it was almost like, okay, the bad boys of hockey, and then, every other team had bounties on their heads.
It's interesting, and I'm going to throw it to Mayor Boughton in a second, but I thought there's so much talk in this documentary from Galante himself, Jimmy Galante himself. We hear loyalty come up again and again, loyalty. But I kept thinking, well, what about integrity? And let me ask you, Mayor Boughton, and Brian, if you got to dip out, go ahead and do so whenever you want. But you're also welcome to stick around. But I look back, and I was a person who was in downtown Danbury an awful lot in the Trasher days. I started at the News-Times 2003. I don't remember how old I was. I think I was in my maybe I was 30 at most. I don't know how to add. But I was a member of the Polish American Club right there, card-carrying member. I'd go to 2 Steps. I was a regular at Cousin Larry's up the road there. I remember, I was just texting one of my friends. We got into sort of a verbal altercation with Trasher players at that country bar that was in Danbury for 5 minutes. Luckily, they didn't beat the heck out of us. I had a mechanical bull, which I proudly broke by accident because of my heft. But so you had this great thing in a way happening in that particular block of Danbury at that particular time, where the city was really trying to push people to go downtown, and he was putting butts in seats. And there was something about the mystique that fit Danbury and just fit hockey at that particular time. And then in 2 years, well, the guy was a massive cheat. The team is shut down. He's in jail, and that's it. Do you carry any resentment? And I might be projecting, Mayor Boughton, but is there any resentment when you look back about what unfolded in just those 2 years of the Danbury Trashers?
I don't know if I carry resentment. Certainly it was, look, when you have, and I think Karen can probably speak this really well as Sussman too. When you have that big, that massive of an investigation with that many agents working on it, with that many resources dedicated towards investigating one organization, it's unnerving, in a sense. You hear things. This is right when the investigation was going on. When Jim decided to do the team, and I said this publicly, and interestingly enough, I was interviewed for that documentary. I spent 3 hours with those guys that did the documentary. It all fell on the floor, but that's okay. I think that's probably a good thing when it's all done. But when Jim first said he wanted to do this team, I had heard the rumors, but I didn't have anything concrete to point to. I couldn't say you did this. No way. Yes, he had a tax indictment and that he had served his time. We're the second chance society, and we were so desperate for a win downtown to get something going there that, as you mentioned, would put seats in. And it worked. And I have to say, I didn't like the fighting. I stopped going after about maybe 4 or 5 games between the 2 years. And the reason I stopped going was, first of all, Section 102, I could not walk in that building without being completely harassed. And it was mortifying. I mean, it was, if you were with somebody, or I was with my wife at the time or whatever, and I walked in, I would I got to get out of here. They thought it was funny. I just found it embarrassing. And then, I understand fighting is part of the game, but I thought there was too much fighting, not to be, it just was not my thing, but you look at it, it did fill the arena. You take a great organization like the Danbury Titans that followed them a couple teams after. They were a really solid organization with good funding as well. And they were great level hockey. Nobody went compared to what Jimmy did because there was no blood on the ice. There was no fighting. So unfortunately, it's like negative campaigning in politics. Everybody says they hate it, but they always read those flyers, right? So, that was a little bit of an issue. So am I resentful that we weren't able to continue that on and build on that success? I think a little bit, sure. I mean, I thought they had a kernel of a great idea. Maybe not so much fighting. Maybe we scale it back a little bit, but obviously that's a rough league, and that is one step below the NHL. So I get it.
When you look at the Yard Goats, what the Yard Goats have done, and how they've become like the darling of media. It's like, I don't know if the reporters get passes all the times, but I can't go on Twitter without seeing something about the Yard Goats. And it was like, that seemed like that was the potential in Danbury. How about, Mayor? I was looking back, and you were, I started at the News-Times in 2003. I was at a weekly paper before that. In my mind, you had been mayor since like 1971, as far as I knew. I had no institutional knowledge. I was just trying to keep Paul Sussman from screaming at me, but you had only taken office in 2002. You were like a brand new mayor, and you got this guy with his charisma, and that goes Brian Koonz. Thank you, Brian, for coming. But did it create any, in those early days, in your first couple of administrations there, did it create any problems politically for you, where you have this guy and there's the rumors out there? I know he poured $3 million, $2 million, whatever it was, to get the arena up to snuff that had been sitting, I guess, vacant for a while, or didn't have whatever. Was there anything rough waters in terms of Galante and your beginning of your political career?
Generally, no. I mean, see, Jimmy, Danbury is a city, but it's like a small town. Everybody knows each other, even though it's a city, right? So people knew or had heard the rumors like I had. But there's just a couple little quick things I just want to sneak in here, Eugene. One is, and the Hartford Courant got this wrong, and I'm not going to say who, and I did correct it after, but the Courant thought that the city owned the arena. We did not own the arena when Jimmy did those renovations. In fact, the permits were applied for by Eagle Eye Sports. That's the company that owned the arena that was owned by somebody who lived in New Jersey. So we had nothing to do with that, so there's no way I could go influence permits or anything like that. We had nothing to do with that. We didn't own it. And there was a perception early on in the investigation that the city owned the rink and somehow the Trashers got a special deal to be in the rink. And that's just not true. The second thing is that in the documentary, and those two young guys do great documentaries. If you have not seen Wild Wild West, put it on your list. It's fantastic.
It's outstanding, yeah.
It's outstanding. They also did the Battering Bastards of Baseball, which is really
Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
Not the independent team. And
they're good guys. But I caught it towards the end. They said that Kevin O'Connor, who's a good friend of mine, who was a U.S. attorney, said when you throw out a net, and it goes against the ocean floor, you catch a lot of stuff. And they said, like we caught the Waterbury. And Joe Santapietro was not the mayor of Waterbury. He was the former mayor of Waterbury. He was elected in 89 and indicted in 90 or 91. And he had been out of office for, 10, 15 years or whatever. So that wasn't quite accurate either. But again, those two things I thought, outside of that, I thought, it was very well done. But look,
it wasn't our paper though. That wasn't.
That's right.
For the record, that wasn't me or Paul. That was the
last thing I'm going to say, Karen, unless asked by Eugene, the coverage from the local paper, the News-Times became the go-to paper about what the hell is going on in this investigation. Why? Because you guys were boots on the ground. You were there every day. You knew all the players. You knew who to call. And then you also had your contacts both with the federal officials and with the prosecutor's office.
And we were also accurate. I like to pride ourselves on that.
That's why you're accurate. Because
we double check, good reporters do.
That's one thing, I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen or Paul, but I specifically remember the News-Times never saying like Jimmy Galante mobster, Jimmy Galante mafia. And I remember, because I was the online guy in 2006, and I had to put all the audio, the wiretaps from the FBI on our website, that's a whole other, there's a document.
Yeah.
The News-Times website in those days. But he was associated. He paid a mob tax to the actual mobsters. But I remember and that was Paul, and you guys were very careful.
It was annoying, because we had to say alleged mob ties.
It was kind of,
It doesn't sound as good, and it's awkward, but we were always, it wasn't as flashy.
Different era of journalism, I think, and that, we just didn't do hot takes. We didn't sort of say what was on our mind. We didn't feel it was our job. And I know Karen feels very strongly about this because we used to talk about it, to really analyze. It was our job to report what was going on. And we had no specific evidence that we had in front of us that he was an organized crime figure. It was easy to deduce along those lines that he might be, but that's a way different standard. And at least that era, the era that Karen and I came up in journalism, of putting it in print in a newspaper. Now, you could pursue stories suspecting he is and seeing if that panned out, but it was just a different era. And I think the one thing that I almost sort of took issue with the documentary is, in retrospective, well, everyone should have known this. Well, in retrospective, it's easy to know this once the feds indict him and there's all this paperwork to be seen. But Karen and I don't have access to wiretaps. We don't have hundreds of FBI agents whispering in our ear. So we're covering it in real time and covering Galante in real time. And he's a man, as Mark just said, he's a man of many layers, of many dimensions. He's donating money for new football fields for New Fairfield and hospital wings and stuff like that. And you just come off as sort of sore losers or of downers in the community, as buzz killers, if you're going to always crap on people who you suspect might not be the best people at heart, but still do good things for the community. So you have to be careful, I think, when you're covering the community. Karen, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was blown away, and I'll throw it back to Karen. I apologize too, but I was blown away. There's one part of the documentary where one of the I don't know, team people is like, well, you know, he was Italian and he was in the trash business. So what do you think? I was like, what? How can you just, I can't believe how you could just say that. But Karen, so you were involved in like the court stuff. You were the court reporter for the News-Times. And you were involved in the very first, I mean, it was Fred Lucas who had covered like the raid, and then you were covering the court stuff. And I know you were well connected and well sourced on the local level with courts and attorneys. But when the feds get involved, my impression, because I have no sources at either level really, the feds are a whole different ball of wax, right? They're much more impenetrable to kind of say, hey, here's what's going on. Was that challenging for you as to trying to chip away at what was going on here?
Yeah, that's a really good point. They are hard. They were harder to source, and they didn't say as much. But different. I mean, I don't want to say who, but there were different people that did talk, and that were helpful. Yeah, I don't want to out anyone, but you know how journalism is, good reporting and just being a pain in the neck, and eventually someone does talk. And you don't maybe get stuff on the record, but maybe you get stuff that you can, that takes you somewhere. So we did have some good sources, but yeah, of course it's harder, right? One thing
Go ahead.
What Paul was saying was really interesting. Was something that I've considered a lot too, about the layers of Galante, because I know you were saying he's an enigma, and one of the things that struck me during the documentary was just how it showed how close he was with his family, and like a family guy, all those videos of him with his kids. I mean, you don't always see that with families. I think it's still
Karen, I thought that was a takeaway, was the relationship between AJ and Jim. I never saw them like that, growing up, it was fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I had that sense when I was covering him too, that he was very loyal to his family. I have a funny Harple story. Do you guys want to? I think Harple would want me to talk about it. It's not fun. It's not funny, but
Let's say who Dave Harple he was a former News-Times photographer for forever and passed away.
Yeah, great guy. Great photographer, great guy. And I remember I was writing. It was the point where I was writing a personal profile on Galante, and he wouldn't call me back. He wouldn't email, or nobody at his company, even I think Dunleavy, who used to work for the News-Times, who went over to work for Jimmy, wouldn't email us back. And when you write a profile on someone, you obviously would like at least a comment. You at least want to let them know what's coming, but nothing for like couple weeks. So then one day in the newsroom, I was like, I'm gonna just go to his house in New Fairfield. He's got this, I don't know if he still has it. I don't think he does, but he had this gorgeous house in New Fairfield. So Harple just happened to walk by. I'm like, Harple, do you want to come with me? Because I don't want to go alone. So Harple and I went, and we're thinking, he's gonna not answer or just kick us out or scream. But to be honest, he never screamed at me. He was never rude. And when we got there, he let us in. We talked to him for like an hour. Like, I know you said you had a conversation with him, Eugene. We talked to him for an hour. I don't really remember too much. And he was with, I don't know who, but it was an business associate, probably maybe one of his legal team. It was pre-trial, like a pre-trial thing. He was out. He hadn't gotten sentenced yet. He talked to us. But one thing I still remember was, and this was a long time ago, but I remember that after an hour, somebody from his family came home, and I don't know who it was, but he told us to go out the other door. Like, he was being very protective. He didn't want us to run into them. It just seemed like he was. And a couple other things happened where I don't want to say who, but like relatives of his called me angry. I just got the sense that there was love and loyalty, at least to the family.
Within the family, yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's in the beginning of the documentary. One of the first, it's like literally the first scene where you get one of the guys. I think it was T-Bone, that guy, whoever, the equipment manager, kind of says, "Well, he was like Darth Vader," and then you have like the two twins being like, "Oh, this is the meanest guy ever," and then the T-Bone's like, "And I'm a good judge of character. I really liked him," and I'm like, "What?" Because the one time I talked to him, he didn't come across as angry or intimidating. He was definitely, I don't remember I was trying to get information out of him, which was totally useless, and he was having, I think he was having fun. But he reminded me, I don't mean to disparage the guy, but I had worked for a guy in New York at a video store, right, when I was in college. And the guy embezzled $365 million from Philip Morris Tobacco. He was a con man. I mean, and he had the same person. It was very similar personality to what I experienced with that 1 hour with Galante. He was just sort of huffing and puffing, I thought, to some extent. But now, Paul, you were obviously the editor. You were the ones that at the very beginning when all this, and I'm talking about the, when the case broke, when they raided White Street.
What I remember
there.
the least about, but go ahead.
Well, no, let's talk about, because when we were off mic for a second there, you were talking about previous encounters you had with Jimmy, which I thought was really interesting, that you and even Karen might have had as well. Something, a football field that he had financed up in New Fairfield.
Well, the bottom line is I came to Danbury in 1999, and Jimmy Galante, in a place without, and this was before Mark was mayor, so I can say that without a lot of celebrities, he sort of qualified as one of the sort of well-known people in the area, sort of a personality that everyone knew. So he was sort of a buzz in my ear as the managing editor for the first couple of years. And the first thing I can remember that came to light was that he wanted to donate a new football field to New Fairfield High School with this fancy artificial turf that now everybody pretty much has, but so you don't have to maintain it. But his quid pro quo was that the girls couldn't use it for soccer or field hockey or any of the sports that he considered less than tough and masculine. And we started to write stories with that. And Karen, I thought you had written one of the stories because it had Title IX stuff, and you knew someone who did some Title IX expertise.
Lawyer, yeah.
You wrote some of those stories how you couldn't do this. You couldn't have a high school sports facility and say it's only for guys and not for women. And this went on for a little bit. We wrote a bunch of stories, and one day I got a phone call. As I get, a million phone calls of managing editors, every politician and school principal and congressman and whatever wants to complain about coverage. And someone says, probably a secretary, Mr. Galante wants to talk to you, puts him on. And we had this conversation. And as I told Eugene, I never felt for a second like he was threatening me or was going to, wanted to break my wrist if I didn't stop the coverage. He was trying to explain what he was trying to do. And if there was a legal problem, well, we'd get it sorted out. But, he kept saying, I want to do something right for the kids. And my perception is he, from his inner perception of himself, thought he was misunderstood. He thinks everybody misunderstands him, from the media to the FBI. He's just a misunderstood guy, and he's usually out to do the right thing. That was my perception of him. Later, we had, and Karen, I didn't remember if you were part of this troop or not, he invited us out to AWD, Paul Steinmetz, who was my boss, the editor, Mary Conley, and I thought another reporter, but it could have been Jason, the sports editor, too. And we were having this conversation, and it got a little bit more testy because Mary Conley, the editorial writer, liked to bait him, as she does everybody.
Right.
And he says at one point, well, Mary, you write about me like Tony Soprano. And her response was, well, I wouldn't do it except you keep acting like him. So that was my two big encounters with him. But I just got the impression that he was a guy who thought, in many circumstances, ranging from giving a hockey team to his kid who loved hockey but had been injured as a player and was never going to be a player, ranging from that to the high school thing in New Fairfield to didn't he give a hospital wing or something?
Yeah, the hospital, right?
Yeah, I think he was trying to do the right thing, and no one really understood him because he had this gruff and unpolished demeanor. That was my impression of him.
And Mayor Boughton, I mean, you're born, raised Danbury. I mean, you're as Danbury gets. So here is this documentary now comes out about, a trash hauler with mob connections who does time, indicted and convicted as part of a RICO case. Is it a blip in Danbury? Is it good, bad? I don't mean to keep concentrating on the negative here, but I'm fascinated. What's been the reaction in Danbury? I guess I'll ask you.
Yeah, well, people are fascinated by it. Everybody's either has watched it, will watch it, or is tuning in to watch it tonight. I think that when you can get Drake to put on your uniform and go perform at a show or go to a club, people would say it's a positive. I've got sort of this theory, and maybe it's just I'm just getting crazy when I get older, but wouldn't this just be the most amazing setup to relaunch a hockey team back right in the same facility, maybe not as rough and tumble, but think about it, right? He'd be sold out for the first like 30 games, right, after this documentary. So, but then again, you know, I don't know if I don't know if I could ever see them doing this kind of thing again. It's such a big undertaking. So I will say that in general, the feedback that I've gotten is, aside from everybody screenshotting my little cameo role in there, people have said that not many people sort of got the Section 102 thing, but they sort of were mentioning to me how that didn't really reflect well on Danbury. And I'm like, look, you know, first of all, most of those people were from out of town. Right. And secondly, you know, Jim has many facets to him, and he did an incredible amount of good, but he also had this other side to him that, you know, was challenging. If you look at his system, and I don't know if Karen was going to get in this or we have enough time, but the vision he had for disposal of waste, the vision now, not when he actuated, with actual vision, where he would pick up your trash, process your trash at his transfer station, use a baler to put it, make it like a hay bale, put it on a train, on the train car that he owns, on the tracks that he owns, and send it to a landfill that he owns, was ingenious. It's the definition of a vertical monopoly. He controls every aspect of it, and he probably could have saved their folks about $25 a ton on their tipping fee, which translates into lower fees for our residents. So that would have been great. But the problem was there were all this other stuff going on, right? So you never got to that thing. And now what's the state talking about right now as we sit here? Sending our trash to landfills. Like somebody was there 15 years ago and you all were upset at him because he wanted to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is, just like Paul said, very challenging person to understand and to know. And I heard the stories too, Eugene. He had nicknames for me. People would come back and say, you know, he calls you the little mayor or little Caesar or whatever. And I used to joke about it and laugh about it. But was I ever intimidated by him? Absolutely not. Was he ever hostile with me? Absolutely not. And I think, you know, he knew not to get hostile with a politician. That would be a bad look for him.
Yeah, because now after watching I'm sorry to interrupt, Mayor.
That's okay.
I just can't help myself. But after watching the documentary, I was like, oh God, I'm going to have people on here and I'm going to say, you know, Jimmy Galante was a cheat. You know, actually, thankfully, Brian Koonz said it first. Yeah. But that was my impression of him. It's just like it's sort of a con man and a cheat. And now, but after watching the documentary, I'm like, oh wait, now someone's going to come to my house and slash my tires, because the documentary sort of makes him seem a little dangerous, which people are very much responding to. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but usually a documentary, there's a redemptive arc to it. You know, it tells this story, and at the end, the person learns a lesson of some kind, or there's some bigger moral message for society. That's completely absent in this documentary.
Well, either Mark or Brian said it though. The arc is AJ's, not Jimmy's.
Yes.
You know, and true.
It's really
Absolutely.
AJ's story more than Jimmy Galante's story, because the interview with Jimmy Galante is very unrevealing in the documentary. Exactly. You almost felt there was a lawyer standing about 5 feet off screen during the filming talking about what was going on. I thought the whole thing was more, I almost thought the legal stuff got in the way. As a sports fan, I thought almost got the legal stuff got in the way of a really good story about this renegade hockey team.
Paul, you're right, and it was funny because in my interview, I call them kids because they're young, they're mid-20s. They asked me, "Can you explain in layman's terms what did Jim do, or what did he allege to have done?" And the best way I could phrase it is, look, the public has the right to a fair, free, open marketplace. They have a right to that, right? And when you corner the market and you don't provide that opportunity, you have eliminated that right for people out there. That's what he did wrong. And they're like, well, isn't that an antitrust issue then, more than a criminal act? I said, well, you know, if it's alleged that you're using, you know, some kind of intimidation, right, to enforce that monopoly, then it's a different story. It could be criminal. So it is fascinating, but the arc is AJ's. I think AJ grew into the job, as Brian said. He had more money to play with than other people did, but he did put together a very exciting team. And I've talked to AJ many times now that he's an adult, and he has learned. He is a gentleman. Every email he's ever sent me has always been very respectful. And I think his takeaway from this was that, you know, you got to do things straight up.
Yeah, that's
For any
Go ahead, Paul.
sports fans who are listening or watching, the sort of thing you didn't get in the documentary is not all their players were bruising fighters. They're not all, aspiring pugilists. If you go back, and I didn't memorize this, but I went back and looked at their statistics, they had a lot of guys who scored 20 and 30 goals, which is a lot of goals in hockey over those years. So the guys they focused on the documentary were the brawlers, but they weren't the guys who helped them win games. In fact, if you look at the statistics, a lot of those guys, they didn't even let play in the playoff games because they knew it was a different animal. You needed to win a playoff game with skill and not all this fighting. So like anything, that documentary had a narrative, and the narrative was it was just the fighting that won. But the cheating, the breaching of the salary cap that let them hire all these top players also let them hire a lot of skilled players too for that level. And that's really what made them good more than fighting. That team would have won with the skill level he put together without all the fighting. The fighting is what put the 2,500 butts in the stands each night and got the national publicity, but that's not why they won games.
Yeah, Eugene, I was at that first game. I was there. Actually, it was with Wayne Shepherd. He was still the publisher of the paper, right? Everybody from being,
I'm near his boyhood home. I'm about 10 houses away.
Yeah, give me a pizza over in Roseland when you get a second. But anyways, I was there, and I don't remember that opening fight. And that's something I would have noticed. There was a game later on in the year where they fought before they dropped the puck. That I remember because I had heard about it at City Hall the next day. But I don't remember them having a fight right before they dropped the puck. And I don't know. Everybody, if they say it's so, it must be so. But I mean, I was there. It didn't stand out to me if that's what happened. And I think there was sort of a conglomeration of different events that they tried to put together to tell their narrative.
There was a little dramatic license, like with the Sopranos thing, I feel. So to me, I'm just not 100% sure that it's 100% accurate. Like, I just take it with a grain.
Right. Yeah. I remember the opening night was a big deal at the paper. I remember that, Paul Sussman. That was a lot of. I mean,
Dave
that was
Harple shot the photo. We had a huge front page photo right before the opening faceoff. All of the players on the ice, except the goalies, you can see them. The referee's about to drop the puck. Great shot, sky view, and it says something like our headline was "Danbury officially becomes a pro hockey town." It was
No. I remember the headline. It said "Game on."
Game on. Okay. Game on. So I think
maybe that was the subhead.
Thing that would have happened was have been a brawl. We would have had that photo too.
Yes, I'm telling you, it didn't happen.
I think the whole. Listen, there were some epic brawls, and I do remember that, and it became an issue with that team. And I think the sports guys did a great job covering it. But again, that team didn't win because it brawled better than the other team. It won because it could afford to overpay all these minor league hockey players who are still skilled enough to put the puck in the net. That's how you win hockey games. You don't win by fighting better than the other guy. You just don't. And I think that was lost in the whole thing. The other point I wanted to make about the Section 102, and Mark brought that up, they were out-of-towners. One of the contexts is the Trashers came along at a perfect time for pro hockey in Connecticut. The Whalers had been a favorite in Connecticut and had been ripped away from us in the mid to late 90s. New Haven had a minor league team called the Nighthawks for years and years, from the 20s up into the late 90s, and then had turned to an independent team called the Knights in the early 2000s. They had closed. All these hockey fans in Connecticut were desperate for an outlook, especially the minor league fans from the New Haven area who loved the Nighthawks. That team was adored in New Haven over the years. They would pack the Coliseum, which is 4 times bigger than the Danbury Ice Arena. And those are the people, at least from my personal viewpoint, the games I went to, and my son loved hockey, and we went to games, but who had a lot of those fans from Section 102 showed up in New Haven Nighthawks, New Haven Knights, Whalers outfits. They were desperate hockey fans from out of state, and this was their outlet, just like WWE fans have their outlet when they show up and yell at the heel at the WWE matches. So
you sent me,
and this is, to Mark's credit, in his town, I don't think those were Danbury people, most of them.
You did send me, Paul. You sent me to do a feature story on Section 102 specifically. And yeah, the people that it was hard to get somebody local. They weren't even. It wasn't even like they were from the town surrounding Danbury. I remember that because we were, of course, I wanted to get somebody from Danbury or at least our coverage area. And yeah, they were. I mean, they were definitely they loved the way they were treated. That's one thing I guess that AJ and the crew that ran the Trashers did really well. Like those people were loyal. I mean, they still are to this day. You see some stuff on Facebook where some of the people are still talking about this. So they made them seem really welcome. They're also really drunk. I mean, they were drunk walking in there, which is I fit right in. But yeah, that was an interesting crew. All right, so let's do final thoughts. So I don't blab on for the rest of the night. Does anybody have any final, maybe things that we're not touching upon about the documentary or the history of Galante and Jimmy Galante and AJ Galante and the Trashers and the history of the News-Times? I kind of remember, just one thing randomly, it was interesting to work in the News-Times in those years because I mean, it's a very stable paper from what I hear now. They're doing a great job day in and day out, but it was like a sea change to be there from like 2003 to about 2009. And the Galante coverage, Trasher coverage, was like 2 waves, and I just want to shout out, I saw Wendy Carlson in the documentary, Brian Koonz made in the documentary, Rich Gregory, the former sports reporter, is there in the documentary. The late Mike Duffy, I could tell by his legs and the way he was standing, he was wearing sneakers, were all in the documentary, all former colleagues at the News-Times. Mayor Boughton, you were saying something.
No, I just wanted to ask Karen, what is from, you covering all the court stuff, what is your one takeaway or your one thing that you'll never forget?
From this case?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. But yeah, I guess the big thing was just the different layers and the fact that there was like this different side to him that people didn't
Karen, was there ever really a day in court? I mean, this whole thing was, these raids and sort of quiet and then a negotiated deal, right? There wasn't really ever a big court proceeding, was there?
Yeah, no, right.
It was contained. It was all contained between the press releases and the court filings. From what I remember.
There were a lot of like court appearances where we'd go and he'd be there talking to his lawyer and ignore us and or maybe talk to us if we tried really hard to talk to him, but never really saying much. One thing that was interesting was just, it was such a big case. Like there were a lot of co-defendants. It was like the biggest
40 something, right?
It was, and then every time someone would plead guilty, I mean, you guys in the Eugene and Paul know, then I'd have to do another graphic box. You know what I mean? Because we'd run a graphic.
It was
Joe
torture.
Myers.
What?
Don't remember Joe, our graphics guy?
Joe Myers.
Joe. Yeah. So we'd have to okay. So I love it when it got shorter because then I didn't have to write all these names and double check the spellings and but there were a lot of co-defendants that pleaded guilty and some got jail time, some didn't. And then I believe he was, I forget if he was actually the last, but he was definitely close to the last.
They gave him a perp walk. I remember that because there's that picture of him that's everywhere in like the brown T-shirt and everything like that. The government sort of, that was a little, looking back, they were definitely, and they kind of say in the documentary, they were going to get him.
Yeah, they were going to get him, and they were working on this since the 90s. Yeah.
I remember Eugene, I remember the day of the raids. I'll never forget that because I was out of town. I was in Hartford. I think I was meeting with the governor about something. And my phone was blowing up, although we didn't have smartphones, we had cell phones. And I was getting all these calls from people about, guys walking around with FBI jackets, DEA jackets, all that sort of official government gear with guns and everything. And remember, this is only a couple of years after 9/11. So you don't know what's happening. And I'm like, well, what the heck is going on? So I hop in my car, finish up, and I race down 84 and I get to City Hall and I walk into my office and my phone is ringing and I pick it up and hello. And it's the chief with an FBI agent on the line saying, Mayor, we just want to let you know we're executing warrants at, and he gave me probably 15 addresses. It would be like 122 Smith Street and 307 Jones Street and whatever. And I'm going, oh, okay, well, what's this? What's this in reference to? What, is there an issue? Well, we want you to know there's no, possibility of the community being harmed. There's nothing, it's nothing to do with terrorism or anything like that. But this is an extensive ongoing, investigation. And we're executing all these warrants. I said, okay, well, I appreciate the call, whatever that. But I mean, he when he read off the list of addresses, it probably went on for 20 minutes.
Wow.
So it's like, what the heck is going on? But then, you know, it sort of all came out over the next couple of days.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, everybody. Mr. Sussman, last word.
My last word is the whole thing reminded me of one giant cartoon. And I think the whole cartoon was influenced by another Connecticut organization, the WWE. And we've already made, maybe this is bringing this full circle, but sort of wrapping all the way about, it seemed like this goofball thing at the time from the WWE. And underneath this goofball stuff was this obviously much more serious thing going on. But the layer at the time, the top layer, was fun and funny and entertaining, and probably not entertaining. Every guy on the other team got his face bashed in, but there was an okay entertainment value to it too, that I think you can separate from the wrongdoing that Jimmy Galante did in terms of the law and terms of competitors and stuff like that. The Trashers were fun. There was harmless fun. That's sort of the way minor league sports operated at the time and still do now, but back then was even a little more cheesier. And as far as the documentary, I think, as Karen said, they took some liberties. I think there's a famous quote from a movie when that says something like, when the facts contradict the legend, print the legend.
Yeah.
And I think the documentary prints the legend.
Yeah.
Here's the facts.
That's true.
That's very well said. All right, everybody. I want to thank Paul Sussman, Mayor Mark Boughton, Karen Ali, and then previously Brian Koonz for coming on here tonight. This was really a joy for me. I hope people get a kick out of it. And I want to thank you all for doing this. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Hey, good to see you all again.